To the American Museum of Tort Law. We are so glad you could join us. My name is Melissa Bird, and I'm the director here. It's a true honor to welcome Dr. Ira Helfand. He's a leading voice in the movement to prevent nuclear war. He's a tireless advocate for a safer and more just world, and we are grateful for him to share his time and expertise with us. And I'm grateful that all of you came out here to engage in this urgent and important conversation. Before we introduce Dr. Helfand, I would like to turn things over to Stanley Heller. He is the Administrator of Promoting Enduring Peace. Thanks again.
Thank you. And I really want to thank the American Museum for Tort Law and Director Bird for allowing us to use this room and getting this thing on such short notice. It was really when we came and saw the Holocaust survivor, and that was just a few weeks ago, that's when we asked and we got a yes, and that's fantastic. So I'm Administrator of Promoting Enduring Peace. It was founded in 1952, just years after the Soviet Union did their explosion of atomic bomb, and so what Truman thought was going to be a permanent U.S. monopoly turned into an arms race. And it moved from atomic bomb to hydrogen bomb. Our group, Promoting Enduring Peace, is best known for its Gandhi Peace Award, given out since 1960. Eleanor Roosevelt was the first recipient. By my count, 7 of the winners were anti-nuclear activists, and we have a flyer in the back, and you can see the list of names, and I think you'll recognize a bunch of them. Well, we're back in an unrestrained arms race. Treaties that moderated things for a while have been repudiated. Things are in pretty serious state. So the knowledge and ideas of Dr. Helfand will be of critical importance. And we're holding this event in the early August. I'm sure most of you know that August 6th is the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, and then 3 days later, Nagasaki. Now, with Dr. Helfand. He's a medical doctor. Emergency room was his specialty. And he's a member of the International Steering Group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And that's ICAN for short. In 2017, it won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's also past president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which founded ICAN and itself was the recipient of the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. So in a sense, you're going to hear from a double Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's also co-founder and past president of Physicians for Social Responsibility and a member of the steering committee of Back from the Brink, which he's going to talk about in some detail. He's published in the New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, the British Medical Journal, and has spoken about nuclear weapons in Russia, China, Japan, and a host of other countries. So I think we're really privileged to hear from Dr. Ira Helfand. Right.
Great. Well, thanks, Stan, and thank you all for coming today. I assume that you all know from the outset this is going to be a fairly difficult conversation that we're going to have. I used to apologize to audiences for bringing this material to them. I don't anymore because I've really come to the conclusion that we really have only 2 options. We're either going to talk about nuclear war and do something to prevent it, or we're going to have one, which is going to be a lot more unpleasant. So, again, thanks for being willing to participate in this conversation, and I hope for being willing to participate in a lot of activity going forward. Most of the people in this room are of an age to remember well the 1980s. period of extreme fear that we all went through, that there would be a nuclear war. That fear, that understanding of the danger posed by nuclear weapons, played an enormous role in creating a movement which put pressure on the government here in the United States, on the government even in the Soviet Union, and quite remarkably led to the end of the Cold War arms race in fairly short order. An important lesson for us to remember, which I'll come back to later. The problem is that when the Cold War ended a few years later, the entire world, I think, made an almost conscious decision to suppress thinking about nuclear weapons. I remember very well the fall of 1989 and just the euphoria when the Berlin Wall came down. The sense that we had dodged the bullet, that we were not going to have a nuclear war, that this whole horrible scenario that we had been preparing ourselves in many ways for was not going to happen. And people who went through that experience, I think it really was an almost conscious decision. We were not going to worry about this problem anymore, and we have not, by and large, as a society. People of my age have basically forgotten, for the most part, what we once knew about nuclear weapons, and we've never taught young people. Somebody mentioned before we started that young people, it is said that young people are indifferent to this issue. They're not indifferent, they're just ill-informed. When they hear about it, they get very concerned about it and they want to do something. But there's been an extended period of time when we as a society have ignored this issue. And this to our tremendous peril, because the problem didn't go away, the weapons didn't go away. The numbers came down somewhat, and the 1990s were a safer time than the 1980s. But thousands of nuclear warheads remained, just sitting there, waiting for the world situation to deteriorate again, and waiting for the threat of their use to arise again. That's just exactly what's happened. To a degree that experts like William Perry, the former Secretary of Defense, warned us in 2018 that we are closer to nuclear war than we have ever been, closer than we were during the worst moment of the Cold War. Now, he gave that warning largely in the context of the US-Russia tension, and that was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has obviously made this situation much more dangerous. And the flood of explicit threats to use nuclear weapons that has flowed out of the Kremlin since Russia invaded Ukraine, I think is perhaps the starkest reminder that we have today that this danger is still with us. But the US-Russia relationship is not the only potential flashpoint. Relations between the United States and China are worse than they have been since the 1970s. We're engaged in an active trade war, and there is clear potential military flashpoint over Taiwan and over shipping in the South China Sea. And US and Chinese naval forces play chicken with each other in the South China Sea on a regular basis. Miscalculation there could escalate very quickly to a full-scale nuclear war between these two countries. The situation in Korea is extremely volatile. We went through a period in 2017 when everybody focused on Korea. That's when Trump, the first rendition, and Kim Jong-un were sort of trading insults and bragging about who had the bigger button. It seemed to calm down with the diplomacy that then followed, but that diplomacy failed. Trump did not secure an agreement with the North Koreans. In fact, he got them very angry and reinforced their belief that they needed to have a nuclear arsenal. And they've spent the years since developing their nuclear weapons, developing their missiles. And now South Korea, faced with Trump's apparent willingness to abandon Ukraine, is considering building its own nuclear weapons so that it doesn't have to rely on the United States, something which will make things even more dangerous on the Korean Peninsula. The situation in the Middle East, obviously getting a great deal of attention at this time with the US-Israeli attack on the Iranian nuclear sites, an attack which did not destroy Iran's capability to build nuclear weapons, again, probably reinforced the belief of the Iranian leadership that it needs to have a nuclear arsenal as the only way that it can stand this kind of military pressure from the outside. And finally, among geographical flashpoints, this is a situation in South Asia, which I frankly think is the most dangerous and the most likely to do us all in. India and Pakistan each have about 170 nuclear warheads. They've gone to war 4 times. They had a mini war in May of this year, during which they attacked each other's air bases and military installations, including those which housed nuclear weapons on the Pakistani side. And fortunately, it didn't escalate to a larger conflict, but that situation is not resolved, and the potential for future revisit of this crisis is very real. And if that happens, it will be a disaster not just for South Asia, but as I will describe a little bit later, for the entire world. So, 5 potential geographic flashpoints: US-Russia, US-China, North Korea, Middle East, and India-Pakistan. In addition, there are several other factors that we need to worry about because they are increasing the danger of nuclear war. The first of these is the rapid advance in cyber technology, which is making nuclear installations more liable to hacking. We have about 500 to 1,000 warheads between the US and Russia that are on hair trigger alert. They sit on missiles that can be launched in a matter of minutes. And the launch and control systems are run through computers, which are vulnerable to hacking. And we know that every day, hackers breach US military computer systems hundreds of times. So far as we know, they have not gotten into the US command and control system yet, but we don't know that for sure. And there's a very real danger that this will happen at some point in the future. This is all made even more dangerous by the emergence of artificial intelligence and the clear plan to mate artificial intelligence with nuclear command and control systems. It is said that there will always be a human in the loop. I doubt that. And even if there is a human in the loop, I don't know what human is, upon receiving a notification from AI that they should launch a nuclear war, in the minute they have to make that decision, is going to say, I'm smarter than AI. This is an incredibly dangerous situation that we're creating. The final factor that we need to be cognizant of is the climate crisis and the role that it is playing. And people don't often think of these two issues together, but they really are intimately related. All 9 of the countries which have nuclear weapons claim that it is their policy to seek the elimination of these weapons at some point in the future when the world is safer. And the problem is the world isn't getting safer, it's getting more dangerous. And it's the climate crisis that's driving this. Right now, there are significant areas of the world that are experiencing great stress because of climate change in terms of their ability to grow food and to feed their population. That's going to get worse over the next 20 to 30 years, no matter what we do. And as that happens, increasing areas of the world are going to be unable to sustain their human population. This is going to cause intense conflict within societies over scarce resources of food and water. It's going to cause conflict between countries over scarce resources of food and water. And it's going to cause migration on a scale we've never seen in human history. You know, the political order here in North America and in Europe has been turned upside down by the influx of maybe 5 to 10, 15 million immigrants. The best projections we have is that the climate crisis over the next 3 or 4 decades will produce 50 to 100 to 150 million desperate refugees. And this is going to cause incredible instability. And if nuclear weapons are still on the table as these forces unfold, they're going to get used. So for all of these reasons, we have to understand that the danger of nuclear war is not something that people worried about in the 1980s that we can read about in history books. This is a real and present danger. And because of that, I think it's critically important that we remind ourselves, or teach ourselves in the case of young people, what is going to happen if nuclear weapons are used. And I want to talk about that next. This is the anniversary, yesterday of Hiroshima, the Saturday of the Nagasaki bombings. We're seeing lots of images of what happened in those 2 cities. And they are very powerful warnings of how destructive nuclear weapons can be. But the main thing we need to understand is that Hiroshima and Nagasaki do not begin to prepare us for what will happen if nuclear weapons are used again today. The Hiroshima bomb had the force of 15,000 tons of conventional explosive, 15 kilotons. Most of the bombs in the US and Russian arsenal today have between 100 and 800 kilotons, which is to say they are 6 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. There are other bombs which are even larger, but most of the weapons are in that range. And if there's a war between the United States and Russia, for example, it's not going to be one bomb on one city. Every major city in this country is going to be targeted. And major target cities, like Washington, like Los Angeles, like New York, like Boston, are going to be targeted with 5 or 10 or 15 or more of these weapons. Just a few years ago, in conversation with Bruce Blair, who was quite an authority on these issues, Bruce told me that we currently, this was a few years ago, we currently target Moscow with 100 nuclear warheads. The US alone, doesn't count Britain and France. We used to target Moscow with 400 nuclear warheads. So, what does that look like? I mean, it's very hard for me to even begin to describe to you 5 or 10 or 15 800 kiloton bombs going off. I'm going to use a model of a single very large bomb, 20 megatons. We used to have weapons that big in the arsenal. We don't anymore. But it turns out that one 20 megaton bomb causes almost exactly the same destruction as 9 300 kiloton bombs spread out over the area you're trying to destroy. And so it's really quite a good model to help us understand what we're talking about here. Excuse me. Within 1,000th of a second, the detonation of this bomb, a fireball would form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, 4 miles across. Within this entire area, everything would be vaporized. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself would disappear. To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the explosion would generate winds greater than 600 miles per hour. Mechanical forces of that magnitude destroy anything that we can build. This building, you wouldn't be able to find a trace of it. To a distance of 6 miles in every direction, the heat would be so intense that automobiles would melt. And to a distance of 16 miles in every direction, the heat would still be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Paper, cloth, wood, plastic, gasoline, heating oil, it would all ignite. And you'd get hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour would coalesce into a firestorm, 32 miles across, covering over 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperature would rise to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of New York, or Moscow, or Beijing, large cities, we're talking about 12 to 15, possibly 18 million people dead in a half an hour. And if this attack were part of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia, for example, this kind of destruction would take place at every major city in both countries. All told, something on the order of 200, maybe 300 million people dead in an afternoon. And those who survived would find themselves inhabiting a wasteland that we cannot imagine. None of the things that we required to keep ourselves alive would be available. There'd be no internet, there'd be no electric grid, there'd be no cell phones, there'd be no food distribution system, there'd be no public health system, there'd be no banking system, there'd be no law and order, there'd be nothing. And the vast majority of the people in both countries who survived the attack on day one would also die in the following months. They'd die from radiation exposure, from epidemic disease, from starvation, from exposure to the elements. And this is only part of the story. I've only been talking so far about what happens in the countries that fight the war. But this would be a catastrophe for the entire planet because all of these fires would put enormous amounts of soot into the upper atmosphere, about 150 million tons in a war between the US and Russia at current levels of armament. That soot would block out the sun and drop temperatures across the planet, an average of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. In the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures would drop anywhere from 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We have not seen conditions on this planet that cold in 18,000 years, since the coldest moment of the last ice age. And under those conditions, all the ecosystems which have evolved since the end of that ice age would collapse. There'd be 3 years in which the temperature dropped below zero. There was a frost every single day. production across the planet would essentially stop. And according to a paper that was published in the journal Nature Food in the summer of 2022, 3/4 of the human race, about 6 billion people, would starve to death in the first 2 years. The study only went out for 2 years. The famine would continue, and we do not know what the ultimate death toll would be. It is possible that we would become extinct as a species. That same study also looked at what would happen if India and Pakistan went to war. And it looked at a number of different scenarios, given different numbers of nuclear weapons and different strength. But the largest possible war that could take place, given their current level of armament, and they are adding to their arsenal every month, the largest war that they considered would lead to the death of 100 million people in South Asia directly. But also it would cause a global famine. Not quite as bad as the one that a US-Russia war would cause, but bad enough to kill 2 billion people, a quarter of humanity in the first 2 years, including 130 million people here in the United States. Now, what I've just described is not the plot of a movie. It's not something people have made up to scare us. This is the danger we are living with every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist. And if we allow these weapons to continue to exist, I think it is fair to say that it is not a question of if, but only a question of when this will happen. We know of at least 6 occasions during the nuclear weapons era when either Moscow or Washington began the process of launching its nuclear arsenal, always in the mistaken belief that it was under attack by the other side. And on each of these occasions, the counterattack was called off at the last minute. We haven't survived this far into the nuclear weapons era because we knew what we were doing. It wasn't because we had wise leaders or sound military doctrine or infallible technology. As former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara summed it up, we survived because, quote, we lucked out. It was luck that prevented nuclear war. And we have to understand that that is the current policy of all 9 nuclear weapon states, a hope for continued, perpetual, perfect good luck. And this is crazy. We all know that luck doesn't last forever, and it won't last for us either. So, that's the bad news. And there's plenty of it. But there is very important good news as well. And the main point is, this doesn't have to happen. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature that we have no control over. It is not as though an asteroid is coming at the planet and there's nothing we can do about it. These are little machines. Most nuclear warheads are about the size of the chairs you're sitting in. We've already dismantled about 50,000 of them since the height of the Cold War. We know exactly how to dismantle the 12,000 remain, and we could probably do it in about 3 or 4 years in a process that would not disrupt daily life on this planet at all. All that's missing is the political will to make that decision. And that's where we come in, because we have to create that political will. And we can take, I think, great hope as we undertake that process by the fact that we've already done this once before. In 1983, the United States put Pershing missiles in Europe with the stated aim of being able to fight and win a nuclear war in Europe. This was a totally insane idea, but it was US policy at the time. Less than 2 years later, Reagan and Gorbachev sat down and said together, nuclear war can never be won, and it must never be fought. And it represented a complete 180-degree change in the nuclear policy of both countries, and it was brought about in short order by enormous public pressure, by a demand by millions of people to stop the crazy things that they were doing. We've done it before. We can do it again. And there is, at this point, an international movement that has grown over the last few years, led largely by the countries which do not have nuclear weapons, demanding that the countries that do live up to their legally binding obligations under Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and sit down and have serious negotiations to eliminate their arsenal. These countries, led by, actually by civil society, largely in the form of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, came together in the summer of 2017 and adopted at the UN the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons by a vote of 122 to 1. This treaty entered into force in January of 2021 when the 50th country ratified it. There are now, I believe it's 75 or 76 countries which have formally ratified the treaty, and another 25 that have signed it but haven't ratified yet. The countries which have nuclear weapons have not been part of this process. And so our attention really needs to turn now to changing their behavior, their policy, their thinking. And the place where I think we have the best possibility of doing that is here in the United States. In the 1980s, it wasn't the US, frankly, it was the Soviet Union that really pushed for the change in nuclear policy. I certainly don't see that kind of leadership coming from Putin, and I don't see it at the moment coming from Xi, although he might surprise us. I don't really see it coming from Trump, although he also might surprise us. But we have a system where we change leaders on a regular basis. And what we need to do is to create a movement in this country so that either Trump during this term or whoever follows him in 2029 takes as their highest responsibility the elimination of nuclear weapons. We have formed a campaign in this country, Back from the Brink, to bring about that change. The campaign is modeled on the Freeze campaign of the 1980s, which many of you may remember. We have put forward a prescription of what U.S. nuclear policy should be, and we've gone around the country organizing communities, cities and towns, NGOs, faith communities, state legislatures, to endorse this platform in the belief that if enough people endorse it, we essentially create a national consensus, which is what happened with the Freeze resolution back in the 80s. Our platform's a little bit more complex than the Freeze, but the main point in it is a call for the United States to enter now into negotiations with the other 8 countries that have nuclear weapons for an agreement to eliminate their arsenals with appropriate verification and enforcement procedures put in place and with an agreed upon timetable for dismantling the weapons. We also ask the United States to take a number of intermediate steps, unilaterally, things it can do, which will lessen the danger of nuclear war, demonstrate American commitment to this endeavor, and give momentum to the whole process. We ask the US to adopt a no first use policy, to pledge, like a number of other nuclear weapon states have already, that it will not start a nuclear war. We ask the United States to end the situation where one individual, the President of the United States, has unchecked authority to launch nuclear war. The Constitution says only Congress as a whole can declare a war. Launching a nuclear attack is clearly a declaration of war. We've allowed a system to evolve where the President can make this decision without anybody else having an ability to check that. We ask the United States to take its weapons off territorial alert. This is a vestige of the Cold War. If we decide that we want to blow up the world, we don't need to do it in 15 minutes. We can do it tomorrow. We have submarines that are invulnerable, that are at sea. We do not need to keep our weapons on territorial alert, and it makes them more vulnerable to terrorism. It increases the chance of an accidental launch. And finally, we ask the United States to abandon the plan to spend $1.7 trillion at least, the number's going up, over the next 30 years, to enhance and replace every element of the nuclear arsenal with new weapons that are designed to last till the year 2070 or beyond. This platform is embodied in resolutions that have been passed by about 80 cities and towns across the country, including most of the major cities: Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Des Moines, Tucson, Honolulu. It's also been endorsed by state legislatures in Oregon, California, and Rhode Island, by the Senate in Maine, by the Assembly in New Jersey, and there are resolutions before the Massachusetts legislature, the Maryland legislature. I believe one is going to be introduced into the Connecticut legislature. There is a resolution in Congress, in both houses at this point. In the House, it's H. Res. 317. It currently has 29 co-sponsors. It was only introduced a few months ago, including from Connecticut, both Representative Larson and Representative DeLauro. We were in conversation with Representative Hayes and Representative Courtney and Representative Himes, hoping that they will join. There is also a resolution now in the Senate, SRES 323, that was introduced just a few weeks ago, actually by 5 senators. It has not yet been endorsed by either Senator Murphy or Senator Blumenthal, and we're hoping that they will both become co-sponsors of this resolution also. The campaign's also been endorsed by 480 NGO-type organizations around the country, most of the national faith community. The Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, the Congregational Church, the Unitarian Church, the Reconstructionist Jewish Movement, the Islamic Society of North America, Pax Christi and the Catholic community, Soka Gakkai International and the Buddhist community, and many local churches and synagogues and mosques have as well. It's been endorsed by the Sierra Club, by 350.org, by the Natural Resources Defense Council in the environmental movement, and, excuse me, by many scientific organizations like the Federation of American Scientists, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Union of Concerned Scientists, Physicians for Social Responsibility. We have formed, we now are up to 26 hubs, which are sort of like local foci of activity, including one here in Connecticut that's mainly based in the Hartford area but has people from all over the state. And this is a rapidly growing movement. The 2 most recent developments, which I am particularly excited about, there's now a group called Students for Nuclear Disarmament, which is active both on high school campuses and college campuses. 14 schools are involved in this at this point, and there are about half dozen others in which we are in active conversation with students to form chapters at their schools. We've also been endorsed for the first time in a significant way by organized labor, which I think is a huge step forward. In Massachusetts, the Western Massachusetts Area Federation of Labor, which is the umbrella group representing all of the unions in Western Massachusetts, has endorsed the campaign and has called on all the individual unions to endorse it, has called on the state AFL-CIO to endorse it. The Massachusetts Teachers Association just voted to endorse the campaign about 10 days ago. This is the largest union in New England. It has 117,000 members. And not only have they endorsed the campaign, but they have sent out, they will be sending out rather, information to all 117,000 teachers about a curriculum that's been developed by WGBH, the PBS station in Boston, for use in high schools to educate high school students about the nuclear issue. The Mass Nurses Association have also endorsed, and there are unions elsewhere in the country that in response to this are considering endorsing as well. So we've got a significant movement, and we have the real opportunity to bring about this change. I think when people hear about all of this, a natural part of the reaction is to feel kind of dwarfed by the problem. You know, all these nuclear weapons, little me, what can I do? We've tried to design this campaign, Back from the Brink, to involve communities. The tagline is Back from the Brink, bringing communities together to prevent nuclear war. And we ask people to approach it that way, to reach out to the communities they already belong to the faith communities, to the Rotary clubs, to the unions, to the professional societies, and try to get, as a first step, get them to take a position on this. There is a hub now in Connecticut that people can work with that brings together a whole bunch of people. So people are not working on this problem alone. And you know, it's important to understand no one of us is going to solve this problem by his or herself. But by the same token, no one of us really can be permitted to step back from that part of the problem, which we can address. And that's the challenge I would offer to you today, if you're not already involved in work to eliminate nuclear weapons, that you figure out how you can fit into this program. It's a lot of responsibility, knowing that the whole world can end and you can do something about it. And I think we feel this often as a burden, which is appropriate. But I hope we can look at it in a different way as well. Every one of us wants to do something good with our life. We want our lives to matter. People of my age are thinking sort of legacy. After I'm gone, what will I have done with my time on Earth? those of us who are living today have been given the opportunity to save the world. And there's nothing better anyone can ever do with his or her life. And so I hope people will take up this challenge in that spirit. There's a passage in the Hebrew Bible in which it's reported that God said, "Behold, I have set before you life and death. Therefore choose life, so that you and your children can live." That is literally the choice before all humanity today. And so we all have to choose wisely and act with courage and determination. And if we do, I think we are going to be successful. I think it's something that can happen in a fairly short time frame. And I think that sometime in the relatively near future, we're all going to be able to look in the mirror and say, quite honestly, I helped save the world. And that's going to be a really good thing. So I'm happy to answer any questions people might have and to hopefully have some conversation about what people here can do on this issue. Thank you.
That's amazing. I mean, one of the most significant, important addresses I've ever heard. I just want to mention a few things. The literature table, in the back, we have some back from the Brink literature and stuff from Promoting Indirect Peace. I mentioned one of the flyers. Another one is an offer to do an online presentation of a critical look at that movie Oppenheimer. We've developed that. You might find that of interest. An alarming flyer that shows what would happen in the zones of destruction if that Nagasaki bomb had been dropped on Winsted. And then I'm going to pass around a contact list. And if you would like to get our emails, they've been averaging one email over 2 weeks. So it's not crushing. Just, to get them into the schools, I don't know what they teach. I know when I was a kid, they taught it in the schools. I mean, some of it was fanciful, duck and cover and build a shelter in your basement. I pestered my folks, for them to do that. They never did for some reason. But I don't know if they even mention it in the schools. And hearing about what the NEA is doing in Massachusetts is very encouraging. So we will now go to the Q&A. Thank you.
You mentioned a hub, you said, I think, in Connecticut.
Yeah.
What is that for people to work with on this topic?
So like a hub is basically like a local chapter of the organization.
Right, okay.
And the hub meets, I think it's once a month at 5 o'clock by Zoom on a Thursday. I think it's the fourth Thursday of the month. I will get this information before we finish because I should have had it on my fingertips and I don't. They discuss basically the outreach that got Congressman Larson and Congressman DeLauro to co-sponsor. We're currently focusing a lot of attention on Congresswoman Hayes, who we've been trying to talk to. By the way, Winsted is in Congressman Larson's district?
Yeah. Right.
Is anybody here from Congresswoman Hayes' district? Because we really, really want her to do this. She's not said no, she's just been utterly unresponsive. And it's largely, we haven't even talked to her, it's been her office. And so a really important thing that people could do would be to contact her office and say that you want her to co-sponsor HRES 317. I've got some stuff in the back to remind you what to do. So if people are interested in being part of the hub, if you could just put a little check next to your name on the sheet that's going around, I'll make sure that the hub leaders here, a gentleman named Joe Wasserman in Hartford sort of coordinates it, gets your name and email address, and he'll send you a notice about the agenda and the Zoom link for the next meeting. Yeah.
I recognize that what you're talking about is the 8 countries that have proclaimed that they have nuclear weapons. We know that there are non-state actors who have access to fissionable material. We know also that other countries are working on it. The issue I have, I guess, is once the genie is out of the bottle, how do you see it going back into the bottle?
I think it goes back
Could
into the
you
bottle.
summarize the question for that?
Yeah, the question was, is the genie out of the bottle? Is it possible to prevent, to get rid of nuclear weapons, given that the technology and the knowledge exists? I think the thing that gives us hope in that regard is the difficulty in producing fissionable material. It's easy, relatively, to build a nuclear weapon if you have enough plutonium or enriched uranium, but it's very hard to get plutonium and enriched uranium. It's a very large industrial process required to produce either. An essential part of any regime to eliminate nuclear weapons is going to have to be to place all fissile material under international control and to have a very rigorous system of guarding it. And that's doable. We know where most of the fissile material is. There are a couple of countries that are obviously have been less subject to inspection. North Korea, Israel. We worry a lot about Pakistan, frankly about Russia. But this is I think this is quite doable. It's just something that has to clearly be paid attention to.
Speaking of young people, we've had a program at one of the public universities here for 20 years, which has an Introduction to Problems of War and Peace course, and we do a 2-week section on nuclear weapons. So it's something I want to discuss with you afterwards, but I'd like to invite you to actually do that presentation. And what we found was, so we've done about, I guess, 500 students. Nobody above the age of 22. So that's the group missing here, but they're there over at the universities, in particular the public universities. And what I found interesting, I'd like to discuss with you perhaps afterwards, is the strategy for education. Because one of the things that they don't know is they don't understand the principles of fission and fusion, and not so much the technical physics of it, but rather the point you just made, which is how difficult is it to produce one of these weapons? Can your nasty neighbor across the street do it? Can a terrorist group somewhere in Libya do it? As you pointed out, the problem of obtaining the appropriate fissionable material and refining it. The other point I wanted to make was what students were found interesting that you haven't mentioned, time to limit it, is the question of tactical nuclear weapons, right? And the likelihood of those being used. And as you know, that was threatened by the Russians in the Ukraine situation. That there was a lot of interest in. They hadn't thought about that. And when you think of nuclear weapons, you think of the strategic weapons, the megaton bombs you mentioned, and so forth. The other issue which they found interesting, which they hadn't thought about, was countries that have actually given up nuclear weapons. And in particular, although the circumstances, of course, are a little complicated, South Africa, Canada, and the 3 former Soviet republics. Ukraine may have given them up to their regret, but that was interesting too, because it makes concrete the possibility of a country giving up nuclear weapons. Canada was the Beaumark missiles. That was a big deal. It actually was an electoral issue back in the 1960s. South Africa, obviously because apartheid had fallen, but they had produced, most report, 7 or 8 atomic bombs, probably with the help of Israel, and it tested them in what's usually known as the Gullah incident. So those whole questions of strategy of education, I think that's a really important question, because the students, I think, are interested. I have a class which will start in a couple of weeks, otherwise I would have had them tune in. It's a 100-level course. I only have juniors and seniors, because they're doing it because they're interested and concerned. Right? But the question is, how do you sort of get that information out and that education out to a larger group of people? You talked about the petition signing campaign. That's largely older people, I think, are going to be doing that, although it would be good for younger people as well. But there's a specific question of education of younger people, which is my specific concern.
I'm not sure quite how to summarize all those thoughtful comments. I mean, I guess the basic point is, what should our strategy be in educating students? And what's quite striking is if you go on a college campus and put up a poster saying there's going to be a talk about nuclear war, almost no one shows up. If you go into a class and give a talk like I just gave, the kids are horrified. They're angry that they've not been told this before, and they want to do something about it. And so, I think the key question is, how do we get this information before students? I'm hoping that the popular culture will help us in that regard, and I'll come back to that in a second. But for the moment, our strategy has been to develop this organization, Students for Nuclear Disarmament, and have the students try to create opportunities for people to do presentations on campus. In the best case, presentations which are assigned by some of the professors, so students have to go. I gave a talk at Vassar earlier this year. It was assigned by 2 professors. There were 55 people who came. 45 of them joined Students for Nuclear Disarmament at the end of the talk. Kids are totally excited about this issue when they hear about it, and we just need to get it in front of them. I mentioned the popular culture. Back in the 80s, one of the main things that helped to build our movement was the fact that people talked about nuclear war all the time. There were movies about it, there were books about it, there were songs about it. People had nightmares about it. That's been conspicuously absent. It is changing. Oppenheimer, everyone hoped this was going to be very helpful in this regard. I thought it was a great movie about Oppenheimer, about the 1940s, the 1950s. It didn't say anything very much about the current situation today, and in that sense I think it was a significant lost opportunity. But there are some movies in the pipeline which are going to be much better in that regard. James Cameron has just announced a few weeks ago that he is going to be making a movie about the destruction of Hiroshima. He wants it to be very truthful, accurate description about what happened there. I think it's going to be a really tough movie for people to watch and a very valuable one for people to see. And I saw he did a podcast, a webinar rather, earlier this week, and he seems to really understand this issue very well. I was quite impressed. Denis Villeneuve, the director who makes the Dune movies and made Blade Runner, he's going to be making a movie based on Annie Jacobson's book, Nuclear War, A Scenario, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, you absolutely should read this book. It's a description of how a nuclear war will unfold over the first 72 minutes after a missile gets launched from North Korea. And it's a very rigorous book. It's heavily referenced. There are footnotes all over the place, but it reads like a thriller. You cannot put this down. It goes minute by minute what happens, and he's going to make a movie out of this. And Netflix has bought the rights to the British movie Threads, which everybody here saw The Day After. Yeah? Threads was a British version of The Day After, set in the city of Sheffield in England instead of in Manhattan, Kansas. Netflix is going to make a series out of this. So these will reach a huge audience, and I hope will stimulate the kind of interest in young people that we know can be created if they just hear about this issue. And unfortunately, world events are also conspiring to make young people think about this more. But the level of it's not disinformation, of lack of information amongst young people is really astonishing. I mean, you'll go to a college class which kids have signed up to talk about nuclear stuff, and on their first day you ask them how many nuclear weapons are there in the world, and 5, 100, 12,000, really? I mean, they just don't know this stuff at all, and that's not their fault. It's not the information that's ever been presented to them. So, yeah.
On the question of teaching and strategies to inform people, have you...
Again, to summarize that, a question about the disbelief that people experience when we talk about these issues, because I should have heard about this already.
Yeah.
And in particular, the lack of information around the near misses that have taken place. I think you hit a very important point. When I'm talking especially to young people who are hearing about this for the first time, what I always tell them is, when you leave this room, right now you're very frightened and you're very convinced this is a big problem. Over the next couple of weeks, you're probably not going to hear very much about that. And you're going to start thinking, if things were really this bad, I'd be hearing about this all the time. So that guy was kind of convincing when he spoke to us last week, but he must be wrong, because the danger couldn't be that real. That's, I think, a huge phenomenon. And that was part of what worked in the 80s. You couldn't get away from it. if I gave a talk like this, people would go out and it'd be in the news day after day. Reagan threatening, Brezhnev threatening, and so on. We have to get again to that kind of a situation where the message is being reinforced, and through repetition, so that people understand this is real. I think you're quite right that it's a real barrier to people understanding this. And it's part of the reason why it's important for people to come together in community, because if you just go off by yourself, you don't want to think about this. This is pretty awful stuff. You've got to, get the laundry done and get the kids off to school or whatever. It's very helpful to be part of a group of people who are concerned about this issue and are working on this issue. And the working on the issue is also important for dealing with the despair that can also come in. There are several things which make it hard for people to work on this. One is they can't believe it. Second is if they do believe it, they're kind of overwhelmed by how frightening this is. And what we found is the antidote to both of these is action. People who are active in working to get rid of nuclear weapons are more hopeful about it. That was absolutely true in the 80s when the whole population was terrified about the danger of nuclear war. There were studies that done especially about children, the children of people who were actively involved in the work around the Freeze campaign. They knew more about nuclear weapons, but they were less frightened because they saw people doing something about it. So repetition, action, these are the things we need to do to move this whole process forward. Yes.
Are there any documentaries about the freeze campaign that could be shown to people to make them more hopeful? Because your point was so good, so hopeful that we can do this because we've already done it once.
That was a really great question. Are there any documentaries about the freeze that we can show people to give them hope? I'm sure there are, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't know what they are, but I bet that's something we could find pretty easily with a Google search. There are many, many documentaries that have been made and that are being made currently about the nuclear problem, and I'm sure there's something good that summarizes the success of the freeze movement.
I was taken by the specific points that we can struggle for. But I was curious, it just seems like it's such a slam dunk. Why wouldn't we give up a hair trigger? I mean, what are the counter arguments is what I'm asking. Why wouldn't we give up a hair trigger? And what happens if we don't modernize the inventory?
So questions about the intermediate steps that Baxenbrink proposes. What are the arguments against taking the weapons off hair trigger alert, and what happens if we don't modernize? The argument against taking the weapons off hair trigger alert, believe it or not, is that if we take the weapons off hair trigger alert and there's a crisis at some point in the future and we put them back on hair trigger alert, that will create increased instability. Yes, that's the argument. It makes no sense at all. There are a lot of things about the nuclear enterprise that don't make any sense. I mean, at one point, the US had 30,000 nuclear warheads. This was after Robert McNamara said that 200 warheads were all we needed to deter any potential aggressor. We went from the 200 that we said to be needed to 30,000 at an incredible cost in money, in contaminated land, in people exposed to radiation in the fabrication of these weapons. There's just a lot that's kind of doesn't make any sense, and I can't make sense out of it either. In terms of what would happen if we don't modernize, we have an arsenal that has been tested. We know that these weapons still work. We know that they will continue to work for an extended period of time. Some of the delivery systems are approaching the end of their lifespan. That should be an impetus for us to try to conclude an agreement to get rid of these weapons. What's happening instead is that the US is is modernizing its nuclear force so that the Russians are, so the Chinese are, and it's cyclical. It doesn't just start in the United States. The Chinese have, in some ways, are leading this process, and it's a classic race to the bottom. Everyone is just so afraid the other side's going to get an edge on them that they're doing things which are profoundly dangerous. And the only way to break this is to have them sit down, as Reagan and Gorbachev did, and have a frank conversation about what is going to happen when these weapons are used. And that was the thing that caused the breakthrough in the 80s. Reagan and Gorbachev both understood, finally, that what they were doing was going to destroy the world. And in the case of Reagan, it was largely from watching the movie the day after, incredibly enough. But I think that's what we need to do, is we need to have that breakthrough. And by the way, the Back with Brick campaign works on multiple levels. We try to meet with decision makers wherever we can, but we understand that we're more likely to be able to meet with them and talk with them, and more likely to persuade them if we have a mass movement that's putting forward the same message. But we are trying to work on multiple levels to do that. So I think that's the best answer I can give on that. Yeah.
Does your group work with the Pugwash movement?
Yeah, I mean, Pugwash doesn't do advocacy work the same way we do, but we have a very good tie with the current president of Pugwash through the Nobel Peace Laureate Summit. Pugwash also won the Nobel Prize for their work opposing nuclear weapons and bringing scientists together across the East-West divide. We had a terrific webinar, which, by the way, you should all watch. I'll give you the information in a second, with Pugwash and ICANN and IBPNW, the three groups organizations that have won the Nobel Peace Prize for trying to prevent nuclear war. A webinar in January about the danger of mating artificial intelligence with nuclear command and control systems. We were very fortunate to have as our keynote speaker Geoffrey Hinton, who is referred to as the godfather of AI. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics last year for his work developing AI, and he has become a very fierce critic of AI. He also still thinks there are good things AI can do, but he's very worried about the dangers, and particularly about the danger of it being used in military systems. The webinar is available online. If you go to the International Physicians website, it's called the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW. That's the website, ippnw.org/AI. And you'll go to the page that has this webinar. It's only about 40 minutes, and the two key talks about AI in particular together are only about 18 or 19 minutes. Well worth watching.
Say that site again.
Yeah, it's www.ippnw, International Physicians Prevent Nuclear War.org/AI.
I just had a comment. I actually was watching Amin Four, and she's pretty good. And she had on...
So a comment about the situation in Iran, and did the U.S. and Israel actually destroy the sites that they reported initially that they destroyed? I think there's a lot of uncertainty. Clearly a lot of damage was done, but whether that significantly sets back the Iranian nuclear program, there was a significant quantity of highly enriched uranium, about 400 kilograms, 60% enriched, that almost certainly was removed from the sites before the attacks took place. So the Iranians have that. And to enrich it further to weapons grade would not be that difficult.
Actually, that's what he was saying.
Yeah.
They kept referring to the 60%, they were talking percentages. So the one that knows about the development, he's a nuclear physicist, whatever his true, basis in science, but he did keep referring to the 60% because everybody does. And he said, yeah, but they could still, do that in a certain amount of time. And so he was explaining that. I thought that was interesting.
It's very hard to eliminate a nuclear program with bombs alone. You really need to have an agreement. You need to have on-site inspection. You need to have the kind of diplomatic apparatus that was created by the agreement that the Obama administration arranged with Iran, and which was, for no good reason, torn up by Trump in 2018.
Yeah.
Can I just, again, a show of hands, how many people are in Johanna Hayes' district? So,
I actually work with all the representatives.
a really, really positive outcome that could come from this gathering today is if every one of you called her office this afternoon
Yeah, okay.
and asked her to co-sponsor. It's HRES 317. And if you call the switchboard, in DC, the 202 number, and ask to speak to the person in the office who handles defense and international affairs, and just say that you would really appreciate it if the Congresswoman would join Congressman Larson and Congresswoman DeLauro in co-sponsoring this resolution. Again, I think she is inclined to do it, but because she's not said no, we just have not been able to, we've not been able to have a meeting with her, and we've not been able to get a clear answer from her in close to 2 years of trying.
Wow. Could it be the community of people that also is uninformed or misinformed, don't care, or they're in a totally different mindset? Because that obviously can contribute to someone in a position that doesn't want to move too much to one side or the other. Just making a general comment about why some people may not. I don't know. Of course, we should call, but...
No, I think it's very important to call. What we have found, we've had this experience with a number of other congressional offices where we just couldn't get an answer. Finally got through and they said, yeah, of course. Who wouldn't co-sponsor this resolution? There's a lot of stuff that they're dealing with, and the nuclear issue is not yet as prominent in their thinking as it needs to be. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do, is to make this issue more prominent in people's thinking. Most people, when they think about the nuclear danger, want to get rid of nuclear weapons, but they're thinking about lots of other things instead.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we got a lot of terrific information, and appreciate you all for coming. Appreciate those who are viewing online. And so I think we're going to wrap it up here, and we should get to work.
Thank you all. Thanks.